bring out the disclaimer. The things that I'm going to be preaching about and ministering about, there's stories involved. This is not for us to look at things hindsight and pass judgment and say, oh my gosh, what was this person thinking? Oh, why did they say that? Why didn't the doctor do? This isn't for that. We're not sitting here trying to judge those things, but rather just illustrating things that took place and seeing how God was involved in all of it so that it would work out for the good. And so this morning, this evening's service will be part 2, and it's the peace in the storm. So I mentioned my wife was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, and that's a condition where your immune system attacks your nervous system, causes it to shut down, and in so doing, your body shuts down. And the doctors have different treatments they can prescribe for this with the idea that they stop it from ascending. It typically begins in your feet, and as it ascends, they want to do these treatments to stop it. But if those treatments aren't successful, you develop a severe case of GBS, going all the way up to your head, facial paralysis, suspension of your breathing. And so this took place in June is when it began. And tonight I want to talk about peace in the storm, because peace isn't determined by what is or isn't happening around you. It's often decided by where your mind is fixed during the storm. It's all good, Pastor, is what I told Pastor Moynihan on the phone. During the first week of Ricky being admitted to the hospital, I was talking with Pastor Tim. I'm explaining different things that have taken place over the course of the week. How Ricky had been using a walker, and then she couldn't even stand and couldn't walk, and there's all these difficult things that are taking place, and her condition was very serious. And I said, it's all good, Pastor. And Pastor Tim, in his very lovingly manner, said, no, it's not all good. Your wife is in a very bad condition. He wasn't being negative. He was acknowledging reality. And what I was trying to do was explain something that was difficult to put into words. I know this is serious. I know things are bad, but somehow I have peace. Later, I was speaking with someone else, and they said, I don't know how you're not losing it right now. You've done a good job keeping things together. And I told them, I don't know how to explain it other than I feel like I'm in a storm, but I have peace about the whole thing. Peace doesn't mean that everything's good. Peace doesn't deny the diagnosis. Peace doesn't deny suffering. And peace doesn't pretend that the storm isn't happening. There can be a storm around you without there being a storm within you. And in our text, the disciples, they are battling 2 storms. Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35, says, on the same day when evening had come, he said to them, let us cross over to the other side. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was. And other little boats were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that it was already filling. 38. But he was in the stern asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? In Matthew it says, O you of little faith. Verse 41, and they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey him? You know, sometimes following Jesus leads you into the storm. That's what was taking place here. They were where Jesus had brought them. Mark 4, 35 to 37. On the same day when evening had come, he said to them, Let us cross over to the other side. This is Jesus' plan. This was his idea. This is where he was bringing his disciples. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in the boat as he was, and other little boats were also with him. And the great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filling. Sometimes following Jesus, we'll find ourselves in difficult situations. But they were exactly where Jesus told them to be. They weren't there because they disobeyed. They were in the storm while obeying Jesus. And so serving God doesn't exempt us from the issues of life. We're not exempt from sickness, loss, setbacks, or disappointments. We're not exempt from storms. The storm was real. Our text describes the waves beat the boat, water filled the boat. The disciples were not exaggerating. The wind was real. The water was real. The danger was real. And that's important because faith doesn't require us to deny reality. Ricky spent that first week in the hospital, and the plan was supposed to be that she was going to be discharged on Saturday, which didn't make too much sense to us because she couldn't even walk. She couldn't stand up on her own. And so how are you going to discharge someone like this? In my mind, I'm thinking, I'm going to wheel her out in a wheelchair, pick her up, put her in the car, drive her to San Diego, try to bring her to some hospital down here to get treatment. But first thing Saturday morning, they're giving her medicine, and she couldn't swallow an ibuprofen tablet. There's another setback. Her parents arrived. We spent the weekend in the hospital because this is where I learned what NPO is. They decided to designate her NPO, which means nothing by mouth. No food, no drink, no medicine. So she spent the weekend with no water, nothing. But her condition was just worsening. The pain was worsening. And they put her on morphine and then some hydromorphine, Dilaudid. And so she's on these drugs. And in our mind, what we were being told is that she's got to pass some physical therapy assessments and then we could discharge. And so we're not realizing that this isn't just a recovery overnight for her ability to swallow. It's actually a sign that things are getting worse. So we're being set up in a way that in our mind we're thinking, okay, by Monday she's going to be better to some degree and we can discharge. So on Sunday night she took some of the serious narcotics, and about 11:30 at night, and she was in terrible, like I got some pictures and she looks terrible. What she was facing, full facial paralysis. And about 3:30 in the morning, I get up with her and she's in a lot of pain, and I'm asking her, hey, did you take your pain medicine at 3? She said no, and as we went on about it, it was because she wanted to do better on her physical therapy so she could be discharged. She wasn't taking her pain medicine. And so we went through this for a couple of hours, and finally I talked her into taking some of her pain meds so she could get some sleep and be better, well-rested for that assessment in the morning. Went and got the nurse, came back, and he administered the medicine, and within 45 minutes, that medicine had caused her respiratory system to be suspended, to stop working. Just like you see people on the news or out in the street, and they're overdosing. That's what's happening. They're taking these opioids that's causing their breathing to stop. And I go and I get the nurse and I come back and all hell breaks loose in her hospital room. He's calling and they've got some Narcan. They administered it to her. It's not working. They hit her with a second dose of Narcan to try to circumvent the opioids. And things are getting worse. She's not focusing on me. She won't talk. And so I FaceTime our daughter, Hannah. I'm like, you don't realize how bad things are right now, but you need to talk to your mom. Tell her to fight. And so as I stood there with FaceTime going on, and she turned her gaze just slightly to the right, and she's in my view, focusing on Hannah, and Hannah's keeping it together and telling her to fight. The nurse calls for rapid response. And as these people start to come in, I see several of these nurses in training in the room. They're just standing in the doorway. The rapid response team's moving in. So I walk out, let them take care of their job. And I go to meet Ricky's parents at the elevator. I'm telling them what's going on. I had called Pastor Moynihan, asked him to pray. I'm saying this is serious. And then there's the code blue over the speaker. And we're not there in the room. And so we go back down to the room and go into the back corner, and I'm standing there and I'm watching everything taking place at a short distance. Her gown's off. She's got one nurse on top of the bed over her feet. He's telling people what to do. They're putting stickies all over her body. They've got the mask that's giving her oxygen. They're trying to pump oxygen into her. And she's just out of it. And as I stand there in the back of the room, I realize that there's a woman that's standing nearby me, and she's not doing anything to help. She makes some statement, and it hits me. She's the grief counselor. She's the lady that's supposed to talk to me when my wife passes. And I'm praying. I'm like, God, you've got to do something. I don't know what's going to take place here. You've got to intervene. And so they get Ricky to take a breath. She sits up very quickly, takes a deep breath. And I thought, oh, thank the Lord. And then I also thought, oh, no. She had had all these secretions all night long for the last several nights. So I knew that went out, and when she took her breath, it also went in. Most people don't die of GBS directly. They die of respiratory failure, which is what she was experiencing, or pneumonia, which is what she got. So they do a quick EKG. Doctor comes in. They're discussing things. They're going to move her to the ICU, but they want to do a chest x-ray first to check on this pneumonia. And so I walk out of the room with the EKG tech, and I asked her, I said, I know you're not a physician, so you can't give me a diagnosis, but how did the EKG look? I was worried Ricky had a stroke at the time. I was worried her heart had stopped at some point. There's going to be some sort of brain damage. That girl gave me the most mixed response. I was like, oh, that's not good. And so we walk out of the hospital. I'm like, okay, we're going to meet her in the ICU, but not right now. Let her get transferred. She's in a stable-ish condition. So her parents and I go outside, and I'm getting a text message from Aiden telling me, Dad, what's going on? Everybody's blowing up my phone saying they're praying for Mom. So I know something's serious. It's like, what do you say to that? I don't have time to make a phone call. And I'm not going to respond to that in a text message. So I told him to call his sister. I said, call Hannah. Hannah knows what's going on. She's got a good head on her shoulders. And I know Hannah well enough that she's not going to give too much information. We get up to ICU, and Ricky, all she would say to me was, I don't want to be intubated. I don't want the tube to go down my throat. No matter what happens, I don't want to be intubated. The doctor comes in, says, let's put her on a BiPAP machine. It's kind of like a CPAP machine. It's a mask that covers your face, and it's going to breathe. This machine's going to breathe for her. And this pulmonologist was super hopeful about, you do this temporarily, we'll do it overnight. Tomorrow she's going to be getting better. We're going to see this. The next doctor comes in, and he was negative Nancy. Everything was wrong. The world was falling apart. If we don't intubate right now, she could die. Tuesday rolls around, and I asked that negative Nancy doctor, what do you want to see? What do you want to see to tell you that she's getting better? And he says, I want to see her heart rate go down. And I thought, that's easy. Her heart rate's been down. It only went up when he came into the room and started saying all these negative things. And then he said, I want to see her dependence on the machine for breathing to go down. And with all my confidence, I said, that's what you'll see tomorrow. Come Wednesday morning, after, about 12 days of just 3 hours of sleep a night, I'm there for my wife to come off of this BiPAP machine, and I'm there to witness the difficulty breathing where she needs this machine to do it for her. I see what's taking place. She's hypoxic. She can't get enough oxygen. I see this need for a machine to do the work. And the respiratory therapist said, I'll just give it 5 minutes. She's going to be fine. The nurse walks out, comes back in, very nervous, walks out again. And I'm like, what are they doing? Are they ready to intubate right now? I didn't know what was about to happen next. I'm just standing there holding Ricky's hand. The mask is off. The respiratory therapist has an oxygen tube under her nose and is pumping air to give her that oxygen. Within a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, her oxygen went from an unsafe level back to what they called a safer level, which was 90. I leave and I go and I meet with one of her former nurses, talk to this young man. He seemed like he had a really good head on his shoulders, really clear-minded. I'm asking him advice about intubating and if he were in my position. And his advice was to not intubate. Wait till it's an emergency. Then have her intubated, because there's no choice left in the matter. I leave that area and I go and I'm walking through to grab a cup of coffee in the cafeteria before going back up to the ICU, and I see the nurse that was on her feet, part of the rapid response team. Now, he had come up to the ICU immediately when I was up there the first time, and I joked with him in a way because he was checking on her, and I called him doctor, and he's like, oh, no, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a nurse. And I said, well, if you're going to be up here acting like a doctor, you need to become one. And so while I'm in the cafeteria, I run into him, so I begin asking him about intubation and what his thoughts are, and he said she was very close to needing to be intubated. And that is part of my frustration this morning, and our response time was slow. It was unacceptable. He said, outside of this hospital, I'm a nurse practitioner and I can do an intubation. But here, since I'm just an RN, I can't do it. That's why we had to call for a doctor. That's why I called the code blue. He was the first person to tell me, he said, your wife didn't actually stop breathing, but she was hypoxic for far too long, meaning her brain wasn't getting enough oxygen. She could have permanent brain damage. She could have had a stroke, different things. We knew she was okay because, like mentally, cognitively, because she was speaking Spanish with a nurse up in the ICU. So it's like they're talking numbers. So we knew things cognitively were okay. But I asked him his advice on having her intubated, and he said to do it. Have her intubated, gave me some reasoning. But this was still a difficult situation and a difficult decision because I knew what my wife's desire was. I knew what she had told me. I took a medical ethics class about a year and a half ago. And my view is that you give people autonomy. That's my personal view. When it comes to these types of things, let them, if they're capable of making a decision, let them make those decisions. So I very much wanted my wife to make a decision for herself, but I knew the decision that she was making wasn't the right choice. And so I had to make that decision for her. I talked to the negative Nancy doctor, and those things I said would change and told him with all confidence, you'll see these changes, it didn't happen. Her heart rate was better, but her dependence on the machine was not. And I said, I knew it. I saw it this morning firsthand. Tell me about intubation. Tell me about you putting that tube down her throat. And I want you to tell me about if you had to do it in an emergency situation. And he gets done explaining these things, thinking that he has to convince me. But I'm already convinced. And I told him, I said, I just needed to know those things so I could try to convince her. And Hannah had come out. She's listening to this. And we go into the ICU room. And I grab Ricky's hand. And she's got the mask on her face. And I said, Ricky, you need to be intubated. And she's like, I said, listen, I want you to squeeze my hand. And about that time, Hannah puts her hand under there. Squeeze our hand if you're okay with this. And she's like, and I told her, I said, you have pneumonia in your right lung. Her eyes got so big. You could see the fear. And I said, it's okay though, it's okay. They started treating it right away. You're going to be fine. It's only a small amount. We don't want it to spread. It's not going to happen. But if you go through this again and you have to be intubated, you could suffer full pneumonia in both lungs. You could suffer damage to your vocal cords. And I want to hear you sing. I want to hear you sing again. She's just sitting there, and I'm waiting for a squeeze. She's holding out. And then finally I got like the slightest squeeze. I said, okay. Went out and told the doctor, let's do it. Scheduled it for a couple hours later. So for us, the boat was really filling with water. We were seeing it. And peace is not the absence of a storm. Jesus, he exemplifies peace. In our text, Mark 4:38, but he was in the stern asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Jesus is asleep. The disciples are panicked. They're in the same boat. There's the same water, the same storm. But something different is happening inside each one of them. Jesus has peace. The disciples do not. Because they had fear. And what fear does is it questions God's character and his motives. In 38 it says, do you not care? They're challenging God as to whether or not he cares about the situation that they're in. They see the circumstances and they think that God doesn't care. Fear and suffering can make us think, God, where are you? God, why don't you do something? God, do you even care? And what we should be doing with this fear and anxiety, stress and worry is taking it to God. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6, the first part says, be anxious for nothing. Paul doesn't say stop worrying. He says, give it to God. Take your anxiety and your worry and give it to God. Continue reading Philippians 4:6. But in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So let me ask you, have you prayed about it as much as you've talked about it? Let your requests be made known to God. The disciples took their fears to Jesus. Philippians 4:7 says, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. The disciples took this to Jesus. And Paul tells us in Philippians, the peace of God surpasses all understanding. And that's because it goes beyond the circumstances of what's seen. Someone said, I don't know how you're not losing it. it goes beyond understanding. Let's talk about the problem of focus. After spending some time with Ricky and seeing her condition go from bad to worse and worse again, I called Pastor Tim. I walk outside in this courtyard, and I'm pretty sure he was at the gym. You know when you hear somebody that sounds like they're on the elliptical? And I said, Pastor, and I thought, I'm going to hold it together, but I started breaking. As I told him, I said, I'm really struggling right now to balance faith with the reality of what is happening. And he cut me off right there and told me, he said, your problem isn't faith. Your problem is focus. And that hit me. Because that was part of the issue that I was having, this internal conflict. I'm walking downstairs from the ICU, and I know I'm going to call him, and I know I'm going to say this, but inside I'm like, my issue is not faith. I have faith. I can refer back time and time again to different reference points that I have in life. I know I have faith, and I can believe God for this. So it hit me. I said, wow, he's so right. He said, you have faith, but you keep seeing your wife and her situation getting worse. And that's all you're focused on. And to some degree, you have to do that to take care of things and make certain decisions. But you also need to find time away from there to get your focus off of her suffering and get some rest. You're going to be facing very difficult decisions, and you need to be rested to think clearly and use sound judgment. As hard as it is, you need to take your focus off of your wife's suffering. Now, when you go through a storm, what do you see? The disciples, they had the same problem. They were focused on the wind, the waves, and the water. What they saw happening around them became more persuasive than what Jesus' presence should have meant to them. The storm didn't remove Jesus from the boat, but their focus did. Another example of focus in a storm is Peter. Matthew 14:28-31, and Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. He began to sink and cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand, caught him, and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Peter didn't sink until he took his focus off of Jesus. And did you notice that? He changed his focus from Jesus to what was around him, and fear came in. He was focusing too much on the circumstances around him. Where's your mind in the storm? Isaiah 26:3 says, you will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. And that tells us that we need to keep our mind stayed on or fixed to Jesus. That's where our focus needs to stay. It needs to remain on him. There's an old piece of advice, I guess you'd say, for people dealing with seasickness. You're on a boat. Where these storms took place in our text, I've actually been there, and the boat is rocky in the Sea of Galilee. And I have a balance disorder to begin with. It's easy to get feeling this seasickness. But there's a technique that tells you to look toward the horizon. Don't stare at everything moving immediately around you. Don't stare at what's nearby. Find something distant and stable and fix your eyes there. This was what Pastor was telling me. Everything in front of me was moving. Diagnosis was changing. Conditions were worsening. Doctors were changing. Plans to transfer care kept changing. Everything was moving, and I needed a horizon. What did Isaiah say? You will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you. Jesus became my horizon. I chose to see him in the room. I'm in the room with my wife. Her condition is terrible. You can name it. Things that are going on, things that are taking place. Doctors give a bad report, but Jesus is there. That's where my focus shifted. Jesus is here in this room with us. Ricky's pain is severe. Jesus is here. The storm moves, but Jesus doesn't. Jesus brings peace and commands the storm. We need to trust. The disciples needed to trust Jesus before the storm stopped. Mark 4:39, then he arose and rebuked the wind and the sea and said to the sea, peace be still. And the wind ceased and there was a great calm. In the storm we find the unknown. You find the unknown. We don't know how long. We don't know what results. We don't know what it'll look like. The storm raged within the disciples. Fear and worry of the unknowns. But Jesus dealt with this. He asked them why they were fearful. Because he wanted to deal with fear or faith. Seeing the storm within them, he said, "O you of little faith." Same thing he told to Peter when he started to sink. "O you of little faith." What this phrase really means is it's not talking about someone who has no faith. It's talking about someone with underdeveloped faith. Their faith has not been developed in such a way that they can believe for the impossible, for the miraculous. It's underdeveloped faith. The issue wasn't that they hadn't developed faith, but it was that they hadn't developed faith in who Jesus was and is. That's what was taking place. That's why Jesus is saying this to them. You have little faith. You haven't developed it in who I am. That's why at the end of that text, they're questioning, who is this? That even they're questioning these things because they haven't developed their faith in Jesus. It's all good, Pastor. That's what I told him the first week. No, everything wasn't good. My wife was suffering. Our children were separated from us. I didn't know what tomorrow held. And it was about to get worse. Did I mention this morning I love gospel music? There's an oldie. And in the song says something along the lines, I can face tomorrow because he lives. All fear is gone. Oh, I love it. And those are the things that helped me go through this trial. Things are getting worse, but God is good. That's a different focus. Everything around me didn't have to be good for God to be good. My focus shifted. Jesus is in the room. Because God is still good, I could have peace. Not because I knew what he was going to do, not because I knew how the story would end. I didn't. But because Jesus was still in the boat. He's still in the room. You don't have to wait for Jesus to calm the storm around you before he gives peace within you. Let's bow our heads tonight. Every head bowed, every eye closed. Really appreciate your attentiveness tonight. As I mentioned this morning, if you weren't here and you missed it, you got a great 24-minute sermon on YouTube you can watch. Get part 1. Tonight was part 2. And I'm going to preach Wednesday night, part 3 of this short series of what's taken place. I can't cover everything. But what I would love to impress upon our hearts today and moving forward is that God is there. He's involved. God is working through situations and circumstances, even if you can't see it. He's working it out. The Bible tells us that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. Even when we're in our sin, God is trying to work things out for our good, to bring us to salvation, that we come to know Him, so that He could change the circumstances in our life, that He could calm the storm within us. But we know that people have a free will. They can make decisions for themselves. You have that choice tonight. Do you want to keep living life your own way? Or are you willing to surrender to Jesus, to put your faith and trust in Him, and let Him into the room with you? If you're here, you're not saved, you're not right with God, but you want to commit your life to Jesus tonight, you can acknowledge that with an uplifted hand. Just raise up your hand. Unsaved. Maybe you've made that decision before, you've prayed before, but you've been living life your own way, you're backslidden. You want to come back to Christ tonight. You want to make that commitment, unsaved or backslidden. Just lift up your hand. Acknowledge that before God tonight. You want the peace that Jesus brings. Who will there be? Okay, changing the order of service. We're going to open up the altar. Let's come and pray. Let's bring these things before God. Let's believe in Him to move in our situations, our circumstances. Maybe you're not sure of somebody's state of salvation. You can politely approach them about that, men with men, women with women. The altar area is open. Come and pray. If you want to stand and sing, we're going to worship God tonight, singing out that song. No other name.
His name is exalted high above the earth. His name is high